Alright, this video is going to go over the Age of Anxiety, which is really going to be this period between the two world wars, between World War I and World War II. And so as we go through this video, you're going to be able to kind of see some of the differences of things that happened. One of the biggest things that we're going to notice is before the war, people were really excited about the war starting. There was a lot of nationalism where people were really excited about their home nation. They thought that war was a good thing. It would be done by Christmas, and ultimately they had parades for soldiers, and so everyone was excited. They thought war was going to be a good thing. But then, as we talked about before, with the different technologies and the advancements that happened, it took longer. The fighting in the trenches kind of put people at a stalemate, massive casualties, put people kind of after the war in this state of being disillusioned, really pessimistic about the future. There was a lot of people that questioned faith again. We see this again very similar to like the Black Death, where people really question the church again. We see massive casualties and people questioning their religious beliefs. Also, there's this whole idea of the lost generation and how many people were killed and what that meant for societies as they lost a whole generation, and then the attempts to rebuild after the war. So this is a map of Europe after the Great War, or World War I as we know it today. And you can see the areas that kind of moved around positions here. So a few things that you'll see. First of all, you'll see areas that were lost by the Austro-Hungarian Empire in yellow. We'll also see that there's a demilitarized zone. We talked a lot about Blitzkrieg and the attack from Germany into France. You'll also see in here the areas that were lost by Russia. One thing just to note, because we haven't talked about it extensively, is the idea that Russia left World War I because they had a civil war back home. And we'll talk more about that as we talk about how Russia changed and the Cold War coming up. But just know that in the middle of the war, Russia pulled out, and they have their own thing going on, and they were not fighting anymore. And so again, we see some of these areas that they lost during this time as well. A few things just to note about the 20s. It changed a lot of things socially in the world. Class distinctions that we've kind of talked about really declined, especially the aristocracy. We see that the government expanded, and so we have these new white-collar jobs that aren't necessarily factory jobs, but working class jobs that were in businesses instead of being in factories. And so moving on to the next steps past the Industrial Revolution, we also see that women earned the right to vote. And this did not really impact politics a whole ton, because we see that women really just voted like their male relatives did. Also during this time, as we kind of cruise through some different things in the world that's changing, scientific revolution happened, kind of a new stage of this. And you'll see that one of our key concepts for this period is about science. Albert Einstein, Heisenberg came out and challenged these traditional views of the universe. Truth was merely a set of mental constructs, he said. We have this new discovery of the atomic world, and that was going to be replacing the classical world. We also have Freud coming out with his psychoanalysis, which you guys can learn and take another class all about his theories. We also have new artistic revolutions that are happening during this period. People like Hemingway and Steinbeck that you've probably heard of, or Degas, Picasso, Dali. One of the main things that you'll see during this period is how much the war impacted art. And so you'll see a lot of artwork like this. When I wandered around in Madrid this last year, they had in their museum there a ton of things just about after the war and kind of the sentiment you had. And remember when we looked back again at the Black Death and how art was impacted by the Black Death, we see again after the Great War, art was a huge way for people to express again their disillusionment and fear and kind of what they felt about the world. And so here's the Enigma of Hitler, created by Dali. And also Picasso painted his famous Guernica painting, which is a huge thing. Again, also you can see in Madrid. In 1937, which is before World War II and obviously after World War I, we're going to see that Germany and Italy together as allies bombed a Spanish city known as Guernica during what was happening in the Spanish Civil War. And so when we're looking at this, we see they kind of teamed up, and the Spanish asked them to come bomb this city, and so it resulted in a ton of civilian deaths, and we know that that would totally go against the ideas of just war. And Picasso, in response, painted this really famous Cubist artwork that kind of was able to exemplify this. And so if you can ever see this, it's in Madrid, but it's a famous painting during this time. Also during this time, we're going to see that Germany had to pay a ton of money to other places because of their collapse, of basically their loss. And so their economy collapses in 1923, partially because of this lost territory of the Treaty of Versailles, but they had this problem of hyperinflation. And so you can see over time when they went from kind of a stable government and how much like a postage stamp would cost, 0.10 marks, so to us like 10 cents if you think of it that way. In the middle of 1924, it would be 200 billion marks for a postage stamp. It essentially meant that money was worthless in Germany and you couldn't really get anything with it. And so what does that mean for money? You see people that needed to heat their homes and would burn money because it was worthless to them. You would see them, as we see kids here, stacking it. They'd be using it as wallpaper. But essentially the hyperinflation in Germany was out of control. And this will kind of, if we kind of look at causes that lead to the rise of Hitler, people were in dire need. Again, most of the war was fought in other places during World War I, but then as they push back and they lose and they sign the Treaty of Versailles at home, we are now seeing a country that didn't need to necessarily rebuild a lot at home, but we see that their economy is in shambles and people are suffering due to this. Now, what the Dawes Plan was the United States' response to helping reorganize Germany so bad things didn't happen, really was the goal. They wanted to lower their annual war reparations payments, as we discussed before about the Treaty of Versailles and what their payments would be, and pretty harsh on Germany as they took kind of credit for the war, if you will. They reorganized the German currency, and then the United States loaned money to Germany so that they could pay the Allies. This will help stabilize the economy, and for a period of time, not a long time, but a period of time, from 1924 to 1929, they have some economic prosperity in Germany. When you look at the Dawes Plan, this is kind of just a visual for how it worked. We see the United States gives loans to Germany. This will then allow Germany to pay the Allies like France and Great Britain from what they said they would do in the Treaty of Versailles. And then the Allies, now that they have their money from Germany, we loaned money to the Allies earlier in World War I, and now the Allies, because they get the money from Germany, can pay us interest on the war debts. So this was kind of the grand scheme so that the United States didn't lose their money, and also so that Germany would be able to pay the Allies, and then the whole system would kind of work. However, that's not exactly what happened in the long term, even though they did stabilize the German economy. Then we had a problemsome situation in the United States where the Great Depression hit. And there's a combination of causes here for the Great Depression. There's an agricultural depression, there's a decline in wheat prices, agricultural decline in general, the Dust Bowl, and so crops were not productive, and so now they don't have food for people. There was a ton of bank failures where people went and made bank runs to be able to just pull out money, but obviously you know that banks don't have all the money in them, and so they're also loaning out money and other things. And so we see that when people try to pull out all their money, the money doesn't exist, and then people were worried about that. And so banks closed, tons of banks. I believe it's like 40% of banks in the United States closed within the period of the Great Depression. There's an overproduction of goods, so they're continuing to produce at wartime kind of quantities, and so we're seeing that they're overproducing goods and people aren't necessarily buying them. And then also one of the major problems of the Great Depression is people were being able to buy goods and stock on margin or on credit. So they actually never pay anything, but it's as if they did, and then now they're going to have to pay it back later. And so a major issue that's going to cause a massive decline and cause the Great Depression. Now, some of the effects, if you needed to know the effects of the Great Depression, this is going to impact the whole world, especially when we're thinking about how we are loaning money to Germany who are paying the Allies and we're getting interest back. Now we can't do all those things, and countries are turning to economic nationalism. Remember, nationalism is thinking of your country first. We're going to see massive unemployment. German unemployment, for example, is at 40%. In general, when we said this huge burst of production, now there's a huge decline in production industrially. and we see that it declines by 30% in Germany, 20% in France. And so it didn't just happen in the United States. Because the global economy is so connected at this time, it impacts everywhere just like it would today. And then we see poverty and hunger widespread, starvation in Germany. We know that's true also back in the United States. And so this once great Dawes Plan had some problems once the stock market hit, and it fell. And then this really kind of messed up the whole Dawes Plan situation. So there's a few different reactions to the Depression. One, like I said before, economic nationalism. We put high tariffs. Anything that we imported into the United States, we're going to put tariffs on. And then people are going to want to only buy, made in America goods, which will be good for our economy. And so other nations did this as well, which is going to decrease the global trade. There also is going to be a movement now for women to be removed from the workplace because their job is to be, quote, at home, because during the war we pulled them out of the homes to work in factories when men were away at the war, and now we're seeing, again, they're kind of returning to the house because we need less people working so that they are able to provide wages for people, because otherwise they have such a supply of workers that we're going to have some issues. The other thing is planned scarcity. Scarcity is basically this way where they wanted to destroy surplus. Like they literally destroyed goods so that they could make supply and demand work. The really simple way to describe supply and demand is just think if you have a lot of something, then you have. So if you have a ton of supply, then demand falls. We're going to see prices fall. If there's something really popular at Christmas time and there's few of them, but people really want it, the price is going to go up. And so their idea was, let's just destroy the surplus and then we'll be in good shape. However, that's not necessarily going to work. And so here are the biggest thing. Number 4, I would star this because Keynesian economics is going to be a new economic theory, which is going to challenge the idea of Adam Smith, who said you need to stay hands off the economy. Keynesian economics, which is a pretty popular economic theory, is going to say, the problem isn't a lack of demand, or the problem is a lack of demand, not supply. And so what we need to do is we need to somehow infuse the economy with money. And how can we help give money or stimulus, and you've heard of this probably in more recent times, to get people to spend more so we can jumpstart the economy. So Keynesian economic theory is really popular. It challenges Adam Smith and what we've talked about before, which is more laissez-faire economics. And finally, we see the United States have a new president, FDR, who has these New Deal reforms: relief, recovery, and reform. And so the U.S. reforms to boost the economy, prevent economic failures. They start organizations that you probably heard of today, things like the FDIC, which insures your money at banks, work programs to get people working, and the government would pay them. We started things like Social Security, so there was a safety net. And this slowly but surely started to help the economy, but the biggest thing that will eventually help the economy is World War II, to be honest. So if you're just looking at the timeline, we're going to see some of those changes. Note that at this time there's other political radicalization. So now we're going to see the rise of communism and the rise of fascism as a response to this. We're also going to see Germany and Japan turn to more state-controlled economic growth. And so if you look at the timeline here, we see that World War I, we move into the phase of hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic, which is Germany. The Dawes Plan is trying to help them stabilize. Then our stock market crashes in the United States. FDR gets elected. And then we see mid-30s that Hitler starts defying the Treaty of Versailles, having a military buildup, in which we're going to foreshadow World War II.